Last time, in our five-way series, I began discussing Aquinas' proof for the existence of God from the De Ente et Essentia. As I mentioned in that episode, this argument is a metaphysical argument, and by that I mean that St. Thomas argues for the existence of God based solely upon a meditation on the difference between the essence of a thing and its active existence. In the first episode, we examined the first two steps of St. Thomas's argument. In the first step, St. Thomas argues that essence and existence are really distinct in created things, for we can conceive of their essences without knowing whether or not those things exist. In the second step, St. Thomas considers the possibility of a being whose essence just is to exist. What he concludes is that if there is such an essence, there can only be one individual with that essence. Why? Because if there were many, we would need a way to distinguish one from the other, which would mean that we would have to add some distinguishing feature to differentiate one from the other, and thus its essence would not be existence simply. With that recap in mind, and before we get into the details of the rest of the argument, I want to point out an important similarity that the rest of this argument has with the first two of the 5 ways from the Summa Theologiae. In the first and second ways, we saw St. Thomas use what Father Cuddy referred to as an essentially ordered series of causes that lead to an effect. In such a series of causes, the effect is fundamentally dependent upon its cause in such a way that without the cause coexisting with it, the effect would not exist, it would not continue to exist. The example that Father Philip Neri gave in his discussion of the first way was that of a glass room. Say you are sitting in a glass room, and the glass room has no light source of its own. In order for the glass room to be lit, it would have to receive light from what is outside the glass room, say another room. But if that room is also a glass room without its own light, then the outer room also cannot be the cause of the light in the inner room. The ultimate explanation must be something which is a source of light by nature, as the sun is a natural source of light. Without the sun enlightening the outer room would have no light with which to enlighten the inner room. Again, what makes this series essentially ordered is that without the first cause, the intermediate causes cannot bring about their effects. That means that an essentially ordered series must have an ultimate beginning or principle. Or, to put it another way, an essentially ordered causal series cannot be infinite. Such is the style of argument St. Thomas uses to prove that there cannot be an infinite series of movers in the first way, and that there cannot be an infinite series of causes in the second way. He will make a similar claim in the argument from the De Ente, but using existence itself. So how does that argument work? It goes as follows. 1. Everything that belongs to an individual is either caused by a principle belonging to its essence or comes to it from a principle outside of it. 2. In things that have a distinction between essence and existence, the active existence cannot come from a principle of the essence. That is because the essence would be the cause of a thing's existence, which would imply that the essence exists before it exists, which is a contradiction. 3. So if a thing's essence is distinct from its existence must come from outside of that thing. 4. When one thing depends on another for existence, that dependence is structured as an essentially ordered causal series, and so the cause must exist simultaneously with the effect. 5. Therefore, there must be some first cause of existence. 6. This first cause of existence cannot have an essence distinct from its existence. Otherwise, it would depend on something else outside of itself for its existence. 7. Therefore, the first cause of existence must be pure existence. 8. As was noted in the second stage of this argument, there can only be one thing that is identical with its existence. 9. This thing that is identical with its existence is what we call God. As I mentioned earlier, this argument is very similar to those of the first and second ways. In the first way, we saw that there must be some first mover that is itself unmoved. In the second way, we saw that there is some first efficient cause that is not caused. In this way, we see that any essence that is not identical with existence must have a cause of its existence. One thing to note about this last step in the argument is that it is very much dependent upon the second step, which states that there can only be one thing whose existence is identical with its essence. When you combine that argument with an argument based upon the impossibility of an infinite series of essentially ordered causes, then you get a new kind of argument for the existence of God. There are some worries about whether or not St. Thomas successfully makes his point in the first and second stages of this argument, and it is notable that he never really returns to an argument like the first step in his later works, but he does develop his argument in the second step in greater depth in later works. So the last two steps are more fundamental to this argument than the first. Nevertheless, Thomists think that there are still some unanswered questions that remain concerning this argument. Despite these questions, this metaphysical argument is an interesting addition to the arguments for the existence of God in the writings of St. Thomas, and it is good to see how he approached the topic in his early years. And with that, I must bring this study of the metaphysical argument for the existence of God to a close. For readings, podcasts, and more videos like this, go to Aquinas101.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for one of our free video courses on Aquinas. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with your friends, because it matters what you think.